Beginners to stage, beginners to stage.
How many times have I said not to touch the cross?
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Backstage at Cry Havoc, where we are talking about cults, which is a very exciting topic, I think, and I am joined by David K. Barnes and Rafaela Marcus. Please, both, could you introduce yourselves with your pronouns and let us know what you did on the show Cry Havoc? Though, frankly, if you've listened this far and you don't know who David is, well, maybe you haven't listened to them all, but he has been on a few. David, would you like to go first?
Hello, I'm David. He, him. I'm the creator of Cry Havoc, which you may or may not have listened to.
Yeah, hi, I'm Raf, she, her, and they, them. And I wrote episode 7 of Cry Havoc, and also episode 8, the next episode set in the theatre. So I have a vested interest in saying, yes, please listen to just listen to 7 and 8. You don't need to listen to the rest of the
you don't
series.
Need any more context.
But 7 and 8 you should listen to. And you may know me and my other guys as the director and one of the writers of Thrice Forgotten as well. Another Rusty Quill historical show.
Indeed.
I'm getting my plugs in early today.
Well done. Excellent work. Excellent work. Really appreciate it. Right. Let's start with a brief description of what happens in episode 7, though hopefully everyone has just listened. Would you like to take it, Raf?
This is the episode in which Octavius and Mark try to join a cult.
Yes.
They try to join the cult of Mithras, which I'm sure we'll get into, but it was a real Roman cult, on the promise of great riches. And meanwhile, in parallel, Fulvia and Cleopatra are having a spiky girl boss drinks. That's my description. It's all set over a single night. And Octavia's there as well, but I shan't spoil her role.
Do you know what? I think that scene between Fulvia and Cleopatra is the first I ever read of Cry Havoc, because it was the audition scene for Fulvia.
Oh.
Yeah, and I really loved it. So that's nice, isn't it? What's your experience, Raf, with writing for writers' rooms? Have you done that before? Because you write a lot by yourself, I know that.
I do, because I'm a controlling and harsh mistress of... No, actually, this was my first writers' room. And then from here, I was asked if I'd like to come on board with Thrice Forgotten as well, so that was my second writers' room. I loved being in the Cry Havoc writers' room, because I don't know if you covered this in previous episodes, but David and Imani had produced this very, very brilliantly useful and comprehensive show bible that also included breaking down the series into sections and sort of going, well, we're going to assign 2 writers to a section. And I, being who I am, there was a section where they went, yeah, in this bit, it's quite early in the series. We don't really need to do any overarching plot at this point. We just kind of want to play in the sandbox of what we've got. And I went, oh, can I do that, please? Because I have thoughts and ideas and opinions about what might be fun to hear in a sitcom set in ancient Rome.
So what did you have to work from writing them? The show bible, I guess. But did you have things you needed to hit?
Yeah, so then I wrote the next one, which is theatre as well, so that obviously involves Octavia and Charmian. So there are things that I needed to hit in that episode. And then also in the way of when you have a writer's room, then when David takes everything away and script edits it and goes, oh, we've actually decided to move up a plot beat here, so we're going to put that, it could, so sometimes in the notes it was actually, could you write this into the episode? We've now decided that this is a good place for this thing to happen. Or you write a version of a character, and then once David and Imani have looked at the whole series, they've sort of gone, our understanding of this character has moved a bit, so could you rewrite them so they're more like this? So yeah, it was a very kind of collaborative, kind of back and forth process. I would say this one about cults, I think, was more me wanting to write about cults. It was, the prompt was Mark and Gaius need money.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, I've got an idea.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. I was going to ask, was it always going to be a cult? So did that come from you and it came from you?
That was Raf. One of the topics in the Bible said at some point we ought to do an episode that's vaguely about religion. and that was it. And then Raf said, I've got cults. I went, yeah, and came up with an entire sort of outline of Gaius and Mark joined the Freemasons. And I went, yes, yeah, done. Yeah, absolutely.
That's brilliant. Raf, what was your Rome knowledge before? Because I know David has degree history with it, as it were. What was yours?
Well, I'm what they commonly refer to as a nerd, Larry. So
Fantastic.
I do not have kind of history degree kind of level knowledge of it, but I studied Latin at school, again, like optionally. Again,
Sorry.
like a nerd. I'm kind of, I chose to do Latin at school and I really liked it. And then I ended up doing it all the way up to A-level and then didn't do it at university because I kind of had a realistic view of myself and I went, I'm not that good at it. But through reading the language, because very obviously it's a dead language, so kind of the point of Latin is to get an insight into a culture and a set of literature and in its original language. So it was my entry point was very much through the language and the literature. But even before that, it was just one of the periods of history that I loved. I think we kind of have a view of the Romans as it's either sort of orgies and decadence, or it's this kind of sort of sour-faced empire builders, and there's a real weirdness to this period in time. I think it's much more alien than we give it credit for.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what is a cult? Like, I know, right? But like, why is that different to just like a society of people, like a group of people who just meet? Or how is it different to a religion? Or is it not different to a religion? And maybe let's try and narrow that to in Roman times and now as well. I think that's relevant.
Yeah, well, we obviously have a specific idea of associations with the word cult, when we say it now. But it's a word that kind of begins as like a subset of a religion, like a sect, but I don't think there's any hard and fast boundaries to what makes something a cult rather than like a denomination of something. But usually there's a measure of secrecy around it. There's an insiders and outsiders feel to it. The cult of Mithras, which is the one in the episode, which was a real Roman cult, you could also call it a secret society, and you can kind of see where my brain started going in terms of how it's characterized in the episodes. But yeah, it's and a religious cult obviously usually has like a focal point of worship, so it's like lots of Roman gods, but a Roman religious cult would focus just on the one god, specific rites and kind of mysteries related to that. So there's also, if you've read The Secret History by Donna Tartt, a fantastic book that I love, and there's a group of classic students in that who kind of start recreating the sort of Greek ancient mystery rites of Dionysus, who's Bacchus in Roman god terms. So it was this combination of religion and secrecy, I think, of kind of you'd be initiated into it. There are rites and rituals. It has a hierarchical structure to it, or the Mithras cult certainly had a hierarchical structure to it, of like the longer you were in, the higher you ascend. So that is where the kind of Scientology sort of comparisons come in. And,
I just had a little moment of glee, because even though the other Backstage episode with Raph is going to come out after this, we have recorded it before. And it just made me think of Snake Boy, the Buffy episode where they encounter a fraternity cult, right?
I'm sure that was in my head when I wrote this episode. It's a very like Buffy-esque joke, I think, to kind of build up like, this ancient, mysterious, slightly sinister cult, and then it's a drinking society.
Yeah. Gosh, so tell me about the cult of Mithras then. Where did you first encounter them? Who were they? And what do we know about them?
So actually, Gaius is spouting off a bunch of stuff about them at the beginning of the episode, which is all accurate. So he gives you the history of them. But Mithras wasn't a Roman god originally, because this is the other thing, the way that religion works. When you have a colonizing force, is it kind of starts to assimilate local religions kind of and other countries' religions into its own. I came across the cult of Mithras because in London, where I live, you can go and visit the remains of the Temple of Mithras from Roman Britain, and it's in the basement of the Bloomberg building in the City of London, as in the area of the City of London. I think it's actually a recreation, but it's free to go in. You sort of go down into the basement, and it's very beautifully curated, and it's the remains of this temple, and they've kind of created a bit of an installation to give you a feel of what the atmosphere would be like. And I read about this, and I kind of went, oh, and one day I was out and about and I was like, oh, nearby, I'm just going to go and see what it's like. And there's a lot of nice sort of exhibition and information about it. And I went in and I walked around and I'd been reading the information they'd given about the rituals and the hierarchy of the cult. And Mithras is kind of unique in being actually one of the only men-only ones. Actually, mostly they had like mixed gender membership. And I went in and I was like, I am in the heart of the financial district of this city, walking around the remains of this all-male cult that was, by all accounts, influential through the back channels, like the Masons. And I sort of went, this isn't religious at all. I was like, this has a veneer of religion. This is a boys' club. This is a private members' club to kind of create the unofficial channels of power. I've got no way of proving that, but that was my take on it. So, yes, and I going to write this episode, it was kind of all there already. This idea about the cult of Mithras, which was a very popular cult that had kind of come from Parthia, I think it was somewhere. And Mithras is a very weird god who has a specific iconography of like he's riding a bull and he has a funny looking hat and kind of, I think there's a dog and some stars. It's all a very specific set of stuff. But I sort of went, yeah, it's a boys' club. And that then became a drinking society and I was thinking also about like the Bullingdon Club and other sort of all-male establishments that...
I don't know the Bullingdon Club. Is that Cambridge or Oxford?
It's Oxford. It's the drinking society that several of our esteemed prime ministers have belonged to, and it reflects very well on us as a nation.
Yeah. Yep. Great. Something that is occurring to me is I don't know that I wouldn't describe the Freemasons as a cult, but I suppose they are, in a way. But you are right, it's a boys' club, for sure.
Laurie is a Freemason.
No, I just think that people have too harsh a view on them, No, I do not. So, you've mentioned religion a few times. Am I understanding right that the cult or cults would have started in religion?
Yeah, and Mithras was definitely still a religious cult. It's kind of because, the Romans have lots of gods that they stole from the Greeks. They're literally the same gods with different names. In the same way, actually, as if you look at something like Catholicism, now it's such a global religion. There are areas of, kind of like there are sort of South American countries where they have a particular, and they use the word cult but with a slightly different definition, like the cult of Mary worship or the cult of a particular saint, and it kind of more means like a devotion, I think, to a particular religious figure. And it's a huge part of public life, religion in Rome. It sort of crossover also into theatre, which more on that next week. Because I think the thing about mythologies is that when we think of mythologies, we think of them as being not the stories, but they're not the stories. It's like Bible stories. It's their religious stories. There's an element of truth to them, to the Romans, because it's explaining the world. And it's explaining the way the gods behave.
I know Roman religion, a lot of their mythology, they're not really fussed about how the world's created, but they are very fussed about how Rome is created, how Rome is founded. And so they're not really fussed about anything beyond Rome itself. It's a very sort of blinkered view of everything. It's like, let's look at the foundation of Rome, and let's go Romulus and Remus, and let's go further back, look at Aeneas escaping the Trojan War, and coming to Italy. And there's a lot of that. So there's a lot of mythology in that area.
Yeah.
Religion is so fundamental to Roman society. I think to us it's probably the biggest deviation away that this series presents Rome compared to ancient Rome as we know it is the role of religion, which is integral to Roman society in a way in which it is kind of an occasional mention in this. I think there's probably more mention of religion in this one episode than the rest of the series combined. And even then, we're not even looking at big Roman gods. We're not looking at like festivals of Jupiter and Ceres. We're looking at like a cult, and it's a secret mystery cult, which is it's a lot of fun to do something like this, because I think this is when Raph said, I want to do one about cults, I thought, yes, this is one of the easiest ways to have a kind of analogy to now. And I was thinking like Freemasons, but also Bullingdon Club and just drinking societies and these sort of the hazing where people, with initiations, and you get blindfolded and then...
very fraternity feeling.
Yeah, I think leaning very far into that. There's a look at the the initiations of the Mithras cult, how to get into the cult of Mithras, through my esteemed colleague Wikipedia, which says initiates were naked, bound with their arms behind them, and kneeled before a priest, whereupon they would be released from bondage and crowned, but not permitted to rise until a particular moment. It's all very eyes wide shut. There's a great deal of feasting involved as well, but there's all these curious initiations about which we know very little, because the sad thing about them being secret cults is that most of them kept the secret, and so they didn't write it down, and so we don't know much about them. We know they existed, we don't know much about them, but that's good because it means that we can just make it up.
It sort of struck me that, there's these very sort of revered, like the one that's kind of mentioned in the Secret History, like the Eleusinian mysteries and the Dionysian mysteries, all of this, and the kind of interpretation of them through the years, because we don't know the facts of them being, then they must have taken incredible hallucinogens and gone to these frenzied states where they communicate with the divine. And this is my kind of a little bit of an answer to that. I was like, or they're drinking society, or we like dressing up and saying some funny words because we get to have a big drink and a big meal afterwards.
Yeah, because it's not like religion is so tied to everything in a state that there is no division between church and state. Religion is at the heart of Roman society and politics. I think actually Pontifex Maximus, isn't that the highest sort of titles you can have in ancient Rome, and it's connected to the priesthood. In fact, Lepidus was the Pontifex Maximus at this time. He isn't in this series because that would be far too responsible a job for our Lepidus to be able to fulfill. But the real Lepidus was made Pontifex Maximus, and the various statesmen, they all, Gaius Octavian associated himself with the god Apollo. And in fact, much later in his life, tried to sort of circulate the rumour that his father was Apollo and he was actually born of divinity. Mark Antony associates himself with Heracles and then with Dionysus, Bacchus. And it's this thing of, that god you all like, I'm like that. Yeah, I'm like that. He's my mate. I'm sort of like the embodiment of that god. And it's a very odd state of affairs.
Which you can sort of feel Cleopatra's influence in that as well, because the Egyptian pharaohs are gods, they're living gods. And, she was very canny with her iconography of being the goddess Isis reborn, and her son, or her various sort of being, this is Horus, Isis's son, kind of reborn, and that's the sort of branding that she used on the coin. So it's not a huge stretch from there to Mark Antony going, I could be a god.
Yeah.
Deification is quite crucial in Rome. Like you're not a god when you're alive, but when you die, you can be made a god somehow afterwards. So the idea that, Cleopatra walking out as a living god, that's very bad form. You're not meant to be a god till after you die.
Is that anyone could be made a god, or is it just if,
no.
if you're a special person? Gotcha. Yeah, thought so.
So poet Ovid wrote a book called The Metamorphosis, or lots of poems that all tell various myths of transformation. But it also kind of goes chronologically through like the mythological history of, it goes from the creation of the world to the deification of Julius Caesar. And exactly as Dave said earlier, their big like nation building myth is that Rome was founded by a guy called Aeneas, who was a Trojan. He was escaping from the Trojan War, and his mum is Venus. So, there's a divine heritage to Rome. And then hilariously, actually, lots of other post-Roman Empire, a bunch of other European countries sort of copied that, and like sort of went, we were all founded by fleeing Trojans. Yeah. London had a myth, Paris had a myth of like, we had a Trojan as well. It wasn't just Rome.
Yeah. I think the biggest cult, or the cult in Rome, which ends up having the greatest sway over things, because it was a cult for a while, is Christianity, which is technically sort of a kind of a cult for a while, until it gets very big, and then it isn't, because too many people are following it. But that's not happening at this time. But Christianity is a very big thing, and in fact it's Christianity several 100 years later, when Rome ends up, Roman emperors end up converting to Christianity. It's then that they start stamping out a lot of these cults, including the cult of Mithras. The cult of Mithras eventually kind of meets its end because Christianity stamps it out, or at least the imperial version of Christianity as practiced by Roman emperors who are going, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Like this?
And the end of the empires, the Roman Empire fractures into two, and the eastern half becomes the Ottoman Empire, and the western half becomes the Holy Roman Empire, which the joke is always it wasn't holy or Roman or an empire. So, and yes, it's the emperors of the Holy Roman, and that lasts for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. But before, hundreds of years down the line from this series, before Mithras meets its end, absolutely, Christianity is perceived as because it is a sect of Judaism. right? They're kind of, there's not a distinction that the Romans are making between Christians and Jews. They're kind of, and also because Christians weren't making that distinction either, you know, like that kind of, that separation doesn't really exist yet. So yes, it's all a very organic kind of growth of sects and cults out of sects and cults.
And then some get very big.
And then some blow up, you know?
Some do good box office, yeah.
I feel like I should have learned this in school, but because there are so many gods and things, do we know how people... Well, one, how they worshipped, but how you decided which god. Like, did you worship them all? Is it normal that everyone would be in a kind of cult?
I think it's sort of, well, I mean, you've got a sort of a pantheon of gods, and then, I mean, certainly ancient Greece, so you have a pantheon of gods when you have gods for different towns, different cities, different activities, etc. And there are gods for practically everything. But I think there are gods that everyone broadly follows, but then, yeah, I think there would be certain gods, the ones that are relevant to what you do. I mean, if you're a soldier, there'd be certain gods. I imagine if you're a soldier, you'd be quite keen on Mars. But then the cult of Mithras in itself is actually very, a lot of soldiers particularly like that cult, so there must be something about Mithras. I mean, there's all that bull killing, I guess, so they quite like that, and the silly hats. But there are a lot of gods, most of whom are imported, and as Rome expands and then conquers other territories, rather than stamping out religions, as Raf said, they just kind of go, yeah, you can carry on worshipping that god. I mean, we'll do a bit of editing, so it's a little bit more Roman. Off you go and carry on. Because they go, there's no point in interfering with their customs unnecessarily. If they're just going to happy to do what we tell them, they can worship whatever they want. And then it kind of ends up feeding back into Rome, and then Roman citizens start going, that's quite a good god. I like that one.
In Bath, in the UK, so Bath was a Roman, it's called Bath because it's named after the Roman baths that the Romans built there. And the Roman name for it was Aquae Sulis, which is the waters of Sulis. Sulis was a local goddess, and she was a local goddess, sort of a British goddess. And then the Romans went, she's actually Minerva, who's the goddess of wisdom. And when you can carry on calling her Sulis, you can carry on worshiping her, but just know that she's actually...
Just FYI.
FYI, she's actually the Roman god Minerva. So yeah, they're doing this all over. But the other thing that you'd have as well is the Lares, who are the family gods. So each home would have a little shrine. And they're almost like... more like spirits than gods, but it was sort of, you know, pray to the Lars or the Lares to protect the family, this domestic unit specifically.
Yeah. And you've got things like, you know, trying to tell the future by which direction an eagle flies, or looking at the entrails of animals, or there's a lot of that kind of thing as well. And it's all taken, you know, very seriously. Like, before we go and fight in a war, let's do this and make sure that the gods are on our side. And of course, it's easy to think that, you know, if you have a predetermined result you want, you can interpret the things however you want. But it is still also baked into big decision making. There are occasional references to this in Cry Havoc as it goes on, but it's not, I say it's still not very prevalent in the series, which is a bit of a choice, I guess, because partly I'm not particularly religious myself. I have no religious convictions, so when I'm thinking of characters, it's quite low down, the things I think, oh yes, that. But mainly it's because it, as a comedy, and as a comedy where I want the characters to be as relatable as possible, having a lot of sort of practices that seem a bit odd to us, sort of, I don't want to stop and sort of, you know, relatable, you know, drinking, and then suddenly this weird thing. Yeah, I want these characters to be relatable, and I also don't want to fall into the trap of, oh, look at these funny religious practices, aren't they silly for being a bit weird and different?
Yeah.
I think it works here very much because of the whole sort of the cult of Mithras, but the way that Raph has sort of transformed into that kind of a drinking club thing, because there's a very much a modern equivalence to pull upon there. But Romans, you know, sitting there and worshipping Venus or worshipping Mars, and you know, doing something odd doesn't quite fit into the story of Rome. It's a comedy series set in ancient Rome rather than a series about ancient Rome.
We don't know that they're not doing that off screen.
They could be doing it all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's also this way of looking at cults in this episode. It's a very Terry Pratchett way of looking at it as well, is realising the other big influence on that episode in the way that sort of Terry Pratchett is very, very good at presenting something so instantly recognisable and just abstracting it a little bit into a fantasy world. But yeah, this is my Terry Pratchett take on both cults and drinking societies. And the other space in the episode, which is completely ahistorical, is with Cleopatra and Fulvia having a drink, and they're in a sort of what I imagined to be the Roman equivalent of a sort of all-female, as a sort of counterpoint to the all-male Mithras cult, a sort of all-male private members club, a very sort of girl boss members club, and that absolutely didn't exist in ancient Rome. Because even rich women, even the lives of rich women, they were expected to at least present themselves as being, I'm interested in weaving and and sitting quietly, and chastity and virtue, and these hugely prized virtues for Roman women, which then is completely at odds with what we historically know of women like Fulvia, who absolutely were running their own schemes and so on. So yes, sadly there's no Roman like women's club, and that didn't exist. And I can't remember if it's ever said in the episode, but I think I put in the stage directions that it's called Juno's Cock, the wine bar that they go to, which is a mythological reference. Yep. The goddess Juno, who is hero in Greek mythology, has peacocks. So
brilliant.
That was my joke that maybe mercifully didn't
There have
end
been a
up
lot of phalluses in the Backstage episodes, and I think I'm okay with it.
I mean, the Romans wore penises as protective charms. They were everywhere.
Great.
They're very into protective charms, little charms that you wear as necklaces. And some of the most common ones were penises, very often that had wings and bells on them.
Fantastic. Usually I will use a penis as a segue, but I can't right now. I'm going to ask, though, because we touched on women. And spoiler, if you haven't listened to episode 7, you should do that. Where did the decision come from to have Octavia be secretly the Grandmaster? Is that what she's called?
The Pater?
The Pater, of course.
I thought it would be funny.
Yeah, good. I thought it might have been that.
That's mainly it. I think I'd already come up with the thing of like, they're going to get into this society and then find out it doesn't have these fabled riches at all, obviously, and actually they'll end up footing the bill for the next one. And yeah, I needed something to do with Octavia, I think, in the episode, and I thought it would be funny as well to have guys that sort of like, I've been searching for years to find this cult, and then Octavia was like, I found it in a week.
I think originally there was one of the plots, because we had Gaius and Mark with the cult and Fulvia and Cleopatra having drinks there, and originally there was also another plot of Octavia and Charmian going on a date, and Octavia thinking that she might be worrying about she was going to be really dull and, typical Roman woman, just at these sort of posh women's parties. And no, look, I'm more than that. Look, here's a thing I can show you. And she was going to take Charmian and at the end revealed to Charmian, look, I'm also in charge of this cult. But it was because the episode, there was just so much material. And I thought, we've got a lot of Octavia and Charmian material in the episode surrounding it.
Yeah.
The cult is going to take a bit of time, and Fulvia and Cleopatra is kind of a USP of the episode. So that's why Charmian is sort of running away at the beginning and doesn't really turn up again until the end. And I said to Raph, I'm sorry, you've written these lovely scenes, can we cut them because we just don't have enough space? But can we then expand on these ones here?
And I wept and howled, and then I went, oh no, you're right.
You did, but I didn't want to cut any of the Fulvia and Cleopatra scenes. I thought, well, those two characters won't meet again for a little while, I think. So let's maximise that.
I was also just aware as well that with Fulvia, all the stuff that she says about herself in those scenes is true.
Yeah.
And we weren't, we'd been waiting a few episodes now, I think, to kind of get her backstory.
Yeah.
Almost. So yes, I was very, very happy to get that in, and to get in some of the Cleopatra married her brothers and, had to kill all of her siblings on the way to the throne and get all of that in. So yeah.
It's a very pleasing pairing as well, I think, Fulvia and Cleopatra. Like, it's a very... we've kind of come full circle, because we started talking about that scene, and now we are going to have to be at the end of the episode, even though I want to keep talking. I'm going to ask one more question that we have to answer quickly. Did they actually go in for human sacrifice? Do we know that, Romans?
Very rare.
I don't think so. It's the kind of, how was practiced at some points in some religions that probably fed into Rome or were in Rome. But there's no, what evidence of it being a widespread thing at all. So, but I took an educated guess, but the thing that happens in the episode of you have to kind of pretend to do a human sacrifice, I wouldn't be surprised if that was, because this is a thing that happens in religion all the time, if an actual ritual gets replaced with a symbolic version of it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think it's why the Romans also, they are very sort of concerned with, say, the Druids, for instance, because they go, those Druids, those people who do human sacrifice, and the Romans sort of assume that any sort of religious group who aren't them are doing human sacrifices, and are very worried about that. I think it's one that they're actually quite worried about a number of the cults, because they are quite shadowy and secret, and even if a lot of Romans are at them, they don't know what's going on in there, and they're not controlled directly by the state religion, and the state religion is all over the place. He goes, look, if you want religion, we've got it, we've got all this stuff going on, why are you going to go over there to that party? So human sacrifice is something that they would very much detest, but because it's exactly the sort of thing that you might go to a secret cult and then be read and think, I wonder if they do human sacrifice. I've heard they do, and then they go, oh God, they're doing a human sacrifice. Oh no! And perhaps they can have a human sacrifice in this. Yeah, go on. Then.
Yeah,
Chuck it in.
go on. Have two actually.
Yeah.
And just a nice opportunity to a little like fundamental Mark and Gaius difference.
Yeah.
And a tease of an interesting difference.
Yeah, actually, that is a nice character moment for both of them.
Yeah, I really like Ravad Mark as he was going to have to say no, I don't do this. But it's the person who has done lots of killing before on the battlefield refuses to do it here because this is not how you do it. And you go, that's good. Mark is the sort of slightly sort of the slacker, sort of like high school jock character, but he's got certain things he very much rigidly believes in. He goes so far and no further. And Gaius is the person who's still forming what his identity is in this Roman world, is the one who's slightly more likely to contemplate it.
Yeah.
And we sort of play with that.
Through doing like prep for these episodes, I've been seeing more and more little character moments of Gaius, like the hints at who he will become after the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because Augustus was a phenomenally successful.
Yeah.
So there is. It's very, very interesting working on something that is not exactly an origin story, but is sort of going, well, at some point down the road, he's going to become Darth Vader.
Yes.
So,
Right. On Darth Vader, I am going to wrap us up. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I will see you next week. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Backstage at Cry Havoc is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike 4.0 international license. It is directed by Amani Zardo, produced by Laurie Ann Davis, with executive producers Alexander J. Newell and April Sumner. This episode was edited by Laurie Ann Davis and Catherine Vernella. Thanks for listening.